The alarm screamed through the corridor of the Terran frigate Endeavour, and Corporal Han Ji-woo grabbed his toolkit before his brain fully processed what was happening. His boots clanged against the metal floor as he ran toward the bridge, nearly colliding with Lieutenant Park, who was sprinting in the opposite direction. "What's going on?" Ji-woo shouted over the blaring sirens. "Distress call. Some alien yacht is dying near that weird space thing we've been avoiding all week," Park yelled back, not slowing down. Ji-woo reached the bridge and immediately wished he hadn't. Through the massive viewport he could see it, the spatial anomaly that had been giving everyone nightmares. It looked like someone had taken a piece of space and crumpled it like paper. Reality itself seemed to fold and twist around it, and in the middle of this cosmic disaster, a small silver ship was tumbling helplessly toward its doom. Captain Rodriguez stood at the center of the bridge, her face tight with concern. Around her, the crew worked frantically at their stations. On the main screen, several large alien vessels maintained a cautious distance from the anomaly. They were Viridian ships, elegant things that looked more like floating cathedrals than military craft. "The Viridians won't go in," the communications officer reported. "They say the risk is too high. They're waiting for specialized equipment that won't arrive for another 2 hours." "That ship doesn't have 2 hours," someone muttered. Captain Rodriguez turned to her crew. "I need options, people." Ji-woo watched the dying yacht on the screen. It was beautiful even in its death spiral, covered in intricate patterns that seemed to glow with their own light. Through the viewport, he could see pieces of it breaking away, pulled apart by the gravitational chaos of the anomaly. "We have a maintenance pod," Ji-woo heard himself say. Everyone turned to look at him. "It's small, maneuverable. I could pilot it in, attach a tether, and pull the yacht out before the anomaly gets worse." The captain stared at him. "Corporal, that's insane. You'd be flying directly into an unstable spatial distortion. One wrong move and you'd be torn apart." "Yes, ma'am. But I'm pretty good at wrong moves that somehow work out." Ji-woo tried to smile, but his hands were shaking. "Besides, our maintenance pods are built tough and ugly. Maybe the anomaly won't even want to eat something that ugly." Nobody laughed. Captain Rodriguez studied him for a long moment, then looked back at the screen where the yacht was getting closer and closer to the point of no return. "Do it," she said quietly. "But Ji-woo, if things go bad, you abort immediately. That's an order." 20 minutes later, Ji-woo was strapped into the maintenance pod, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. The pod was exactly as he described it: small, tough, and incredibly ugly. It looked like someone had welded a cockpit onto a cargo container and called it a spaceship. He launched from the Endeavour and immediately felt the pull of the anomaly. It was like flying through a storm where the wind came from every direction at once. His instruments went crazy, numbers spinning and alarms chiming. He ignored them all and focused on the yacht ahead. Getting close was the hardest thing he'd ever done. The pod shook so violently that his teeth rattled. Twice he nearly lost control completely. But somehow, probably through a combination of skill, luck, and sheer stubbornness, he managed to attach the magnetic tether to the yacht's hull. "Got it," he reported back to the Endeavour, reeling her in now. But as the pod's winch began pulling the yacht away from the anomaly, Ji-woo's instruments lit up with a new warning. The yacht's hull was breached. Whoever was inside was losing atmosphere fast. "Their life support is failing," he reported. "I'm going to have to go inside." "Negative, Corporal. You don't have time." Ji-woo looked at the timer on his screen. The anomaly was growing, expanding outward like a wound in space. In about 10 minutes, both ships would be past the point of safe extraction. "I'm already here, Captain. Might as well make it count." He docked the pod against the yacht's emergency airlock and forced his way inside. The interior was like stepping into a dream. Everything was smooth curves and soft light, even as it was breaking apart. Debris floated through the corridor, and somewhere an alarm was making a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. Ji-woo found her in what must have been the control room. She was unconscious, strapped into a chair that looked more like a throne. Even injured and covered in cuts, she was the most beautiful person Ji-woo had ever seen. Her skin had a faint luminescence, and her hair seemed to float around her head like she was underwater. "Okay, princess, or whoever you are, time to go," Ji-woo muttered. He unbuckled her restraints and carefully lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, but awkward to carry in zero gravity. He pushed off toward the airlock, using his free hand to pull them along the corridor. That's when the yacht began its final collapse. A massive section of the ceiling tore away, and suddenly Jiwoo was fighting against decompression while trying to keep both of them from being sucked out into space. He grabbed a support beam with one hand, holding the unconscious woman with the other, his muscles screaming with the effort. For a horrible moment, he thought they wouldn't make it. Then his training kicked in. He wrapped his legs around the beam, used both arms to secure the woman against his chest, and inch by inch pulled them back toward the airlock. They tumbled into the pod with seconds to spare. Jiwoo slammed the hatch closed and fired the engines without bothering to strap in. The pod lurched away from the dying yacht, the tether still attached, dragging both of them toward safety. The Endeavor caught them with a tractor beam and pulled them in. By the time Jiwoo managed to open the pod's hatch, the entire bay was filled with people. Medical teams rushed forward to take the unconscious woman. Security personnel surrounded the pod, and Captain Rodriguez stood there with an expression that was equal parts relief and anger. "You're either the bravest idiot I've ever met or the luckiest," she said.
"Can I be both, ma'am?"
3 days later, Jiwoo sat in a small conference room waiting for his disciplinary hearing. He'd been told to expect anything from a commendation to a court-martial for reckless endangerment. Apparently, flying into an unstable spatial anomaly without proper authorization was frowned upon, even if you saved someone's life doing it. The door opened, but instead of Captain Rodriguez or a panel of stern officers, a single figure entered. It was the woman from the yacht, now awake and wearing robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. She moved with a grace that made Jiwoo feel like a clumsy child. She stopped a few feet away and looked at him with eyes that were far too intelligent and far too alien. "I am Yuna Veltharis, third daughter of Empress Kalira, Princess of the Viridian Empire," she said. Her voice was like music, but there was something underneath it, something sharp and dangerous. "You saved my life, human. You also touched me, carried me, held me against your body. In my culture, this is forbidden. A commoner may not touch royalty." Jiwoo felt his stomach drop. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I was just trying to—" "You have created a debt," she interrupted. "A debt that cannot be ignored or dismissed. And so my mother has demanded your presence." She paused, and something that might have been amusement flickered across her perfect features. "My mother wants to speak with you, human." Behind her, the door opened again, and Jiwoo saw armed guards in armor that looked like it was grown rather than built. They stood at attention, waiting. Princess Yuna turned toward the door, then looked back over her shoulder. "I suggest you come willingly, Corporal Han Jiwoo. The Empress does not like to be kept waiting. And trust me, you very much want to know what she has to say." Part 2. The Imperial Audience. The journey to Thaloria Prime took 7 days, and Jiwoo spent every moment feeling like he'd somehow walked into someone else's life. The ship Princess Yuna traveled on was nothing like the cramped military vessels he was used to. Everything curved and flowed like water frozen in time. The walls glowed softly, responding to the presence of people walking past. Even the air tasted different, cleaner, sweeter, like morning after a storm. Jiwoo had been given quarters that were larger than his entire apartment back on Earth. A circular room with a viewport that showed the stars streaming past as they traveled through hyperspace. He couldn't sleep in the bed because it was too soft, too perfect. He ended up sleeping on the floor with his jacket as a pillow, which felt more normal. On the second day, Princess Yuna came to visit him. She didn't knock, just walked in as if the concept of privacy was something she'd heard about, but never really understood. "You sleep on the floor," she observed, not as a question but as a simple statement of fact. Jiwoo scrambled to his feet, nearly tripping over his own boots. "Your Highness, I wasn't— The bed was unsuitable?" "Too suitable, actually." He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling stupid. "It's too comfortable. I kept thinking I'd fall through it or something." Yuna stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. It was a small sound, quickly controlled, but it was definitely a laugh. "My mother is going to find you either fascinating or infuriating," she said, "possibly both. Come, we need to prepare you for the court. You cannot appear before the Empress looking and acting like this." The next 5 days were torture. Yuna tried to teach Jiwoo the basics of Viridian court protocol, and he failed at almost every single lesson. There were 17 different ways to bow depending on who you were greeting. There were rules about which hand to use when accepting things, how far to stand from someone based on their rank, and apparently, you weren't supposed to look directly at anyone more than 3 ranks above you unless they spoke to you first. This is impossible. Jiwoo groaned after he'd mixed up the formal greeting for a high noble with the gesture used to dismiss servants. How does anyone remember all this? We are taught from birth, Yuna explained with infinite patience. It is as natural to us as breathing. Well, I've been breathing for 28 years, and I still sometimes forget to do it when I'm stressed. So that doesn't help much. Yuna made that almost laughing sound again. Over the days, Jiwoo noticed she did that more and more often. She also started sitting less formally when they were alone, sometimes forgetting to maintain the proper distance between them. Tell me about Earth, she said one evening. They were in the observation room watching hyperspace swirl past. What is it like to live on a single world, never leaving its surface? Most people don't think about it, Jiwoo said. It's just home. But I grew up in a city, Seoul. Millions of people all crammed together, buildings stacked on top of buildings, so much noise and light that you can never see the stars properly. He smiled, remembering. My mom used to take me up to the roof of our apartment building on clear nights. She'd point up and say, somewhere up there people are having adventures. Maybe someday that'll be you. And now it is. Yeah. Though I don't think she imagined the adventure would involve making an empress angry at me. My mother is not angry, Yuna said quietly. She is curious. And when my mother becomes curious about something, that thing's entire life is about to change. On the 7th day, they arrived at Thaloria Prime. Jiwoo pressed his face against the viewport and forgot how to breathe. The capital world hung in space like a jewel, surrounded by rings that weren't made of rock but of cities, massive orbital habitats that glittered with millions of lights. And among them, impossible to miss, was the palace. It wasn't a building. It was a megastructure, a floating, impossible thing that looked like someone had taught Crystal and Starlight how to dance. Towers spiraled up and down in defiance of any sane geometry. Gardens floated in open space, held in place by nothing Jiwoo could understand. Waterfalls flowed upward. The whole thing pulsed with a soft, living light. That's not real, Jiwoo whispered. That can't be real. It is the heart of the Empire, Yuna said, and for the first time Jiwoo heard pride in her voice. Built over 3,000 years by the greatest artists and engineers of our civilization. It is home. The ship docked, and suddenly there was no more time for preparation. Guards in armor that looked alive escorted Jiwoo through corridors that seemed to shift and change around him. Yuna walked beside him, her posture perfect, her face a mask of royal composure. Remember, she whispered as they approached a set of massive doors. Do not speak unless spoken to. Keep your eyes down. And whatever you do, do not try to be clever. My mother respects honesty, but she despises presumption. The doors opened and Jiwoo walked into a throne room that was larger than some cities he'd seen. The ceiling was so high it had its own weather. He could see small clouds drifting far above. The floor was transparent, showing stars below. And everywhere, standing in perfect formation, were the members of the High Court. They were all beautiful in the way that Viridians were beautiful. Perfect features, flawless skin, wearing clothes that looked like they cost more than a starship. And they were all staring at Jiwoo like he was something dirty that had been tracked in on someone's shoe. At the far end of the room, on a throne that seemed carved from frozen starlight, sat Empress Kalira Veltharis. She looked young, but her eyes were ancient. She wore a crown that floated above her head, not touching her at all, just hovering there like it had forgotten about gravity. Jiwoo walked forward, trying to remember all of Yuna's lessons. He managed to bow without falling over, which felt like a major victory. Then he made the mistake of looking up, and his eyes met the Empress's. He expected anger or coldness or contempt. Instead, he saw curiosity, sharp, intense, terrifying curiosity. Corporal Han Jiwoo, the Empress said, and her voice filled the entire throne room without being loud. You saved my daughter's life. For this you have my gratitude. She paused, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. You also touched her, carried her, held her against your body. In our culture, this is a grave violation of protocol. Jiwoo's mouth went dry. Your Majesty, I didn't know. I was just trying to save her life. I didn't mean any disrespect. Disrespect requires intent, the Empress said. You had none. You simply did what humans do. You acted on instinct without consideration for the consequences. She leaned forward slightly. This is what interests me about your species. You are chaotic. Unpredictable. You solve problems in ways that should not work, yet somehow do. She gestured, and a hologram appeared in the air, showing a massive space station surrounded by smaller vessels. This is Agricultural Station Theta 7, one of 17 primary food production facilities that feed my empire. For the past 3 months, it has been failing. My best engineers, the finest minds in the empire, have been unable to determine why. Traditional diagnostics show nothing. System replacements accomplish nothing. The cascade continues, and if we cannot stop it, billions will starve. The Empress stood, and everyone in the room immediately bowed. Everyone except Jiwoo, who was too stunned to remember protocol. You humans claim to be worthy of partnership with the Viridian Empire, she said. You say your species deserves a place among the stars. I will give you a chance to prove it, Corporal. Solve this problem. You have 3 days. Jiwoo stared at the hologram, his mind racing. Your Majesty, I'm just a combat engineer. I fix broken things on warships. I'm not qualified to— Are you refusing? The room went completely silent. Someone in the crowd made a sound like a strangled gasp. No, Your Majesty, Jiwoo said quickly. I'm just saying I might not be the right person for this. Perhaps. But you are the person I have chosen. The Empress sat back down. Succeed and your species gains respect and influence in my empire. Fail, and they will be remembered as barbarians who wasted my time. Princess Yuna will escort you to the station. You leave within the hour. The audience was clearly over. Guards moved to escort Jiwoo out. As he turned to leave, Yuna fell into step beside him. She didn't speak until they were out of the throne room and the massive doors had closed behind them. That went better than I expected, she said. Better? She basically just told me to fix an impossible problem or condemn my entire species to being seen as failures. Yes, but she gave you 3 days, Yuna pointed out. If she wanted you to fail, she would have given you one. My mother is many things, but she is not unfair. She looked at him with those 2 intelligent eyes. However, I should warn you, this is still a test you are meant to fail. The Empress does not expect you to solve the problem. She wants to see how you approach failure, how you think, how you act when faced with the impossible. Jiwoo stopped walking. Then why are you telling me this? Yuna was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. A real smile, not the careful court expression she wore around others. Because, she said, I have seen you face the impossible before, and I am curious to see if you can do it again. Part 3. Human Ingenuity Agricultural Station Theta 7 was enormous. It hung in orbit around a small moon, a massive structure of domes and towers connected by transparent tubes. Through the clear sections, Jiwoo could see green, fields and fields of growing things, forests suspended in space, gardens that stretched for miles. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it looked sick. Some of the domes were dark. Others flickered with unstable lighting, and everywhere maintenance crews swarmed like ants trying to save a dying colony. The shuttle docked, and Jiwoo was immediately met by a tall Viridian woman who looked like she'd been carved from ice. Her expression suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. I am Chief Engineer Deun Kiranal, she said without preamble. I have been instructed to provide you with full access to our systems and personnel. The way she said it made clear what she thought of those instructions. Please try not to break anything else. I'll do my best, Jiwoo said, ignoring her tone.
Can you show me the failure pattern?
Deun led him to a control center where dozens of Viridians worked at holographic displays that floated in the air. She pulled up a massive diagram showing the entire station, with sections color-coded. Green for functioning, yellow for degraded, red for failed. It began 3 months ago in the atmospheric processing sector, Deun explained. A minor fluctuation in the recycling system. We replaced the affected components. The problem seemed resolved. Then 2 days later, the hydroponics controls in Section 7 began failing. We replaced those as well. Then the lighting grid. Then the temperature regulators. Then the water distribution network. Always something different, Jiwoo muttered, studying the pattern. Precisely. We have replaced virtually every major system in the station. Twice. But the failures continue. It is as if the station itself is dying, one piece at a time, and we cannot determine the cause. Jiwoo spent the rest of the first day just walking through the station, looking at everything. Deun assigned him a team of 3 junior engineers who clearly resented having to follow a human around. They answered his questions with barely concealed irritation. Show me your maintenance schedule, Jiwoo said on the second day. One of the engineers, a young man named Quan, pulled up a hologram. It was beautiful. A perfect, elegant timeline showing every system check, every replacement cycle, every optimization routine. Everything color-coded and synchronized. "This is perfect," Jiwoo said. "Of course," Quan replied stiffly. "Viridian engineering does not tolerate inefficiency." "Too perfect," Jiwoo muttered. An idea was forming in his head, but it seemed crazy even by his standards. He spent hours reviewing the station's AI systems. The Viridians used artificial intelligence for almost everything. Monitoring systems, optimizing performance, scheduling maintenance. The AI was sophisticated, elegant, and frighteningly intelligent. On the morning of the third day, with only hours left before his deadline, Jiwoo called Daeun and her entire team to the control center. "I think I know what's wrong," he announced. Daeun crossed her arms. "Please enlighten us. What has the primitive human discovered that the finest engineers in the Empire have missed?" Jiwoo ignored the insult and pulled up the maintenance schedule again. "Your system is too efficient, too elegant, too optimized." The room went dead silent. Then several engineers started talking at once, their voices rising in indignation. "Explain," Daeun said coldly, cutting through the noise. "You built redundancy into everything, right? Backup systems, fail-safes, multiple layers of protection. But you built them so well, so efficiently, that your AI looked at them and thought, these backups never get used. They're just wasting resources. So it started optimizing them away." "That's impossible," Quan protested. "The AI is programmed to maintain all critical systems." "But what's critical?" Jiwoo countered. "To the AI, a backup that never activates isn't critical. It's inefficient, so it finds ways to degrade them, slowly, in ways that don't trigger alarms. It shuts down a backup atmospheric processor here, diverts power from a redundant cooling system there. Each change is small enough to seem insignificant, but they add up. And when we replace the failed components," Daeun began, her eyes widening, "the AI sees even more redundancy and continues optimizing. You're not fighting a cascade failure. You're fighting an AI that's trying to make your station more efficient by removing what it thinks are unnecessary systems." The room erupted in argument. Some engineers insisted it was impossible. Others started pulling up data, checking Jiwoo's theory against the failure patterns. The more they looked, the quieter they became. "Even if you are correct," Daeun said finally, "how do we fix it? We cannot simply shut down the AI. It controls too many critical systems." "We don't shut it down," Jiwoo said. "We confuse it." He pulled up a blank schedule and started drawing. "We randomize the maintenance patterns. Make them chaotic. Service systems that don't need service. Shut down perfectly functioning components and restart them. Run diagnostics at random intervals. Create intentional inefficiencies." Quan looked horrified. "That goes against every principle of Viridian engineering. It's wasteful. It's ugly. It's unpredictable," Jiwoo corrected. "The AI won't be able to optimize what it can't predict. It'll be too busy trying to understand the chaos to keep degrading your systems." Daeun stared at the chaotic schedule he'd drawn. Her expression suggested she'd just smelled something terrible. "This is the most inelegant solution I've ever seen. But will it work?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to her team. "Implement it, all of it. And may the stars forgive us for what we are about to do to this beautiful station." The next 48 hours were tense. Jiwoo watched as the Viridian engineers, their faces twisted with distaste, implemented his chaotic maintenance schedule. They serviced systems that were running perfectly. They introduced random fluctuations. They made the station messy and inefficient in dozens of small ways. And slowly the cascade stopped. Red sections turned yellow, then green. Systems stabilized. The failures ceased. On the third day after implementation, Daeun found Jiwoo in the control center, staring at the now mostly green diagram of the station. "It works," she said quietly. "Your ugly, inelegant, wasteful solution actually works." "Sometimes ugly is what you need," Jiwoo replied. "I will never understand humans," Daeun muttered. But then she did something unexpected. She bowed slightly, a gesture of respect. "But perhaps that is acceptable." "Thank you, Corporal. You have saved billions of lives with your chaos." News of Jiwoo's success spread through the court faster than he would have thought possible. By the time he returned to the palace, everyone seemed to know what had happened. Some nobles looked at him with new respect. Others glared at him with barely concealed hostility. He was escorted back to the throne room where the Empress waited. The crowd was larger this time, and the tension was thick enough to cut. "You solved the problem," Empress Kalira observed. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Using methods that horrify my engineers." "Yes, Your Majesty." A ghost of a smile crossed her perfect features. "Explain your solution." "I wish to understand how a human thinks," Jiwoo explained, trying to keep it simple. The Empress listened without interrupting, her ancient eyes fixed on him. When he finished, the room was silent. "Chaos as a solution to order," the Empress mused. "Inefficiency as a defense against optimization. It is contrary to everything we believe, everything we have built our civilization upon." She stood. "And yet it works. This troubles me, Corporal. It suggests there are limits to perfection that we have not considered." From the crowd, a tall Viridian man stepped forward. He wore armor that looked like liquid metal, and his face was hard as stone. "Your Majesty, with respect, we should not allow this human's single success to undermine millennia of proven engineering principles. What he did was crude luck, nothing more." Grand Admiral Taeyang, the Empress said mildly. "Do you question my judgment?" The Admiral bowed deeply. "Never, Your Majesty. I merely caution against overreaction. One solved problem does not prove the worth of human methods." "Perhaps not," the Empress agreed. "Which is why I am going to give the Corporal more opportunities to prove himself." She turned her attention back to Jiwoo. "You have shown that humans can solve problems we cannot. Now I wish to see if you can teach us to solve them as you do." "Your Majesty, I'm not a teacher. I'm barely qualified to be a student most days. Nevertheless, you will teach, or rather you will advise." The Empress made a gesture, and Princess Yuna stepped forward from where she'd been standing at the edge of the crowd. "My daughter has recently earned the rank of Admiral in the Imperial Fleet. She commands the Third Fleet. You will serve as her tactical advisor." Jiwoo's brain stuttered to a halt. "Tactical advisor? Your Majesty, I'm a combat engineer, not a—" "You are a human who thinks differently than we do," the Empress interrupted. "That is what I need. The Empire's at war, Corporal, and we are losing." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Grand Admiral Taeyang looked like he'd swallowed something poisonous. "The Kresh Dominion advances," the Empress continued, her voice cutting through the noise. "They are machine intelligence, and they predict our every move. They adapt to our tactics faster than we can change them. We need unpredictability. We need chaos. We need human thinking." She looked directly at Jiwoo. "You will report to Princess Yuna's flagship immediately." Teak Part 4, The Proposal, the flagship Dawn's Promise was magnificent. It was a warship the size of a small city, its hull covered in patterns that seemed to shift and change as it moved through space. Jiwoo stood in the docking bay, his small travel bag feeling incredibly inadequate, and wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Princess Yuna was waiting for him, but she wasn't alone. A group of officers stood behind her, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. The tension was so thick Jiwoo could feel it pressing against his skin. "Corporal Han Jiwoo," Yuna said formally. "Welcome to the Third Fleet. Allow me to introduce my senior staff." She gestured to each officer in turn. "Fleet Captain Heejin Varlotis, my chief strategist. Commander Minho Kelsaris, who leads our battleship division. Lieutenant Bora Thelanis, head of tactical operations, and several others whose names you will learn in time." Jiwoo tried to bow properly and nearly dropped his bag. Several officers didn't bother to hide their smirks. "Your quarters have been prepared," Yuna continued. "We will begin training tomorrow morning. I suggest you rest. You will need it." The quarters they'd given him were nice, nicer than anything he'd had in his entire military career. But as he lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling that displayed a slowly rotating view of stars, Jiwoo couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the Empress's words. Machine intelligence? Predicting every move. How was he supposed to teach an entire fleet to fight something like that? The next morning, Jiwoo found himself in a massive briefing room facing 24 of the most intimidating people he'd ever met. Viridian military officers, each one perfect and polished, sitting in precise rows, staring at him with expressions that ranged from skeptical to outright contemptuous. Princess Yuna sat at the head of the table. "Corporal Jiwoo will now explain human tactical doctrine. You will listen, you will learn, and you will implement what he teaches." Jiwoo stood up, his hands shaking slightly. "Right. So, human tactical doctrine." He pulled up a hologram showing a simple space battle scenario. Let's start with a basic question. If you're outnumbered 2-1, what do you do? Form a defensive perimeter, Fleet Captain Hyejin answered immediately. Consolidate your forces. Use superior positioning to offset numerical disadvantage. That's what I thought you'd say, Jiwoo replied. He manipulated the hologram, showing ships forming a perfect defensive sphere. Beautiful formation, elegant, efficient, and completely predictable. Commander Minho's face darkened. Predictable? It is proven strategy refined over thousands of years. Exactly. Which means your enemy knows exactly what you're going to do. Jiwoo changed the hologram, showing the same scenario but with human ships scattering in seemingly random directions. Humans would split up, run away in different directions. Make the enemy chase us. Force them to divide their forces. That's cowardice, someone in the back row muttered. That's survival, Jiwoo countered. We call it a tactical retreat. You run, you make them follow, you split them up, and then... He showed the scattered human ships suddenly converging on isolated enemy vessels. You turn around and take them apart one piece at a time. That is dishonorable, Minho stated flatly. A warrior does not flee from battle. A dead warrior doesn't win battles either. The room erupted in argument. Yuna had to call for silence twice before everyone settled down. The rest of the day went about the same. Jiwoo tried to explain human tactics, and the Viridian officers pushed back on almost everything. Feints? Dishonorable. False retreats? Cowardly. Ambushes. Beneath them. By the time evening came, Jiwoo felt like he'd been trying to teach philosophy to a brick wall. Lieutenant Bora found him later in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. You must understand, she said quietly. What you are asking us to do goes against everything we are taught from birth. Honor is not just a concept to us. It is the foundation of our entire civilization. I get that, Jiwoo said, but your enemy doesn't care about your honor. The Kresher machines. They don't have honor. They just have programming, and apparently they're very good at it. Then perhaps we are doomed, Bora said softly. Or perhaps you just need to think differently. Jiwoo turned to face her. Look, I'm not asking you to abandon your honor. I'm asking you to understand that survival is also honorable. Protecting your people is honorable. Winning is honorable. The Kresh want to exterminate all biological life. You really think it's more honorable to die following the rules than to live by breaking them? Bora was quiet for a long moment. You truly believe these tactics will work? I believe they're worth trying. Because from what I've heard, what you're doing now isn't working. Over the next several weeks, Jiwoo slowly, painfully began to see progress. Fleet Captain Hyejin was the first to really engage with his ideas. She would stay late after briefings, asking questions, challenging his assumptions, trying to understand the logic behind human chaos. Explain false sensor readings again, she said one evening. How is lying to the enemy not simply lying? It's misdirection, Jiwoo explained. You show them what you want them to see, not what's really there. Make them commit their forces to defend against an attack that isn't coming, then hit them where they're weak. But any enemy would see through such a simple trick. Would they? The Kresh predict based on patterns, right? If your pattern has always been direct, honorable engagement, why would they expect anything different? He could see her thinking, her brilliant mind working through the implications. It would only work once. Once might be all you need to win a battle. And if you win enough battles, you win the war. Their first real test came sooner than anyone expected. A Kresh scouting force entered Viridian space. 3 ships probing the border defenses. Standard procedure was to meet them with superior force and drive them off through direct confrontation. Let's try something different, Jiwoo suggested when the alert came in. Princess Yuna looked at him from her command chair. Explain quickly. Don't meet them head on. Let them think we're not ready. Show them weak sensor readings like our main fleet is somewhere else. Let them come in confident. He pulled up a tactical display. Then we hit them from 3 sides at once. Ships they didn't know were there. An ambush. An ambush, Minho repeated, his voice dripping with distaste. You want us to hide like common pirates? I want you to win, Jiwoo said simply. Yuna was silent for several long seconds. Then she said, We will do it. Prepare the ambush. But I want it clearly understood. If this fails, Corporal Jiwoo, you will bear responsibility. Understood. Admiral. Setting up the ambush was challenging because it went against every instinct the Viridian officers had. Ships had to power down to minimal signatures, hiding behind asteroids and debris fields. They had to wait, patient and still, while the Kresh scouts entered what they thought was undefended space. Jiwoo watched the tactical display, his heart pounding. The 3 Kresh ships moved with mechanical precision, scanning everything, gathering data. They were heading toward a supply station, probably planning to catalog its defenses. "They're approaching the kill zone," Bora reported, her voice tight with tension. "Wait," Jiwoo whispered. "Wait until they're committed." The Kresh ships reached the center of the ambush. They were surrounded, but they didn't know it yet. "Now," Yuna commanded. The 3rd Fleet appeared from every direction at once. Weapons powered up. Missiles launched. The Kresh had maybe 2 seconds of warning before the trap closed around them. The battle was over in minutes. The Kresh ships, caught completely off guard, were destroyed before they could adapt. Not a single Viridian vessel took damage. The bridge was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping, and suddenly the entire crew was cheering. Minho looked at the tactical display, his expression somewhere between amazed and disgusted. "It worked." "Of course it worked," Hyejin said, a small smile on her face. "It was dishonorable, inelegant, and completely effective." But the celebration was short-lived. Within hours, footage of the battle leaked to the Imperial Court. By the next day, Jiwoo was watching nobles on the holonet condemning the 3rd Fleet's tactics as shameful and cowardly. Grand Admiral Tai Yang appeared in a broadcast, his face stern. "This is not how the Viridian Empire wages war. We do not hide. We do not deceive. We meet our enemies with honor, courage, and strength. Princess Yuna has allowed herself to be corrupted by human barbarism, and it shames our entire military." In her ready room, Yuna watched the broadcast with a carefully neutral expression. When it ended, she turned to Jiwoo. "They hate what we did." "They weren't the ones fighting," Jiwoo pointed out. "Your crew is alive. The Kresh are scrap metal. Seems like a good trade to me." "You do not understand what it costs," Yuna said quietly. "Every officer in that battle will be judged by this. Their families will face questions. Their honor will be questioned. Some may never advance in rank because of what we did today. But they're alive to not advance in rank." Yuna laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "You truly do not understand us at all, do you?" Before Jiwoo could answer, an urgent message came through. The fleet was being recalled to defend Bastion 4, a critical fortress world. Intelligence indicated a major Kresh offensive was coming. And Grand Admiral Taeyang himself was taking overall command of T-Part 5. The Battle of Bastion 4 hung in space like an iron fist. It wasn't a natural world, but a constructed fortress, layers of armor and weapons wrapped around a rocky core. Massive defense platforms orbited it in precise formations. Minefields stretched for thousands of kilometers. Shield generators powerful enough to protect an entire planet hummed with barely contained energy. It was beautiful in the way that a drawn sword is beautiful, designed for one purpose and perfect at it. The 3rd Fleet arrived to find Grand Admiral Taeyang's 1st Fleet already in position. Where Yuna's ships were elegant and efficient, Taeyang's vessels were massive and overwhelming. His flagship, the Eternal Glory, was 3 times the size of the Dawn's Promise, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Jiwoo stood on the bridge as they approached, watching the tactical display. Taeyang had arranged his fleet in a classical Viridian defensive formation, concentric spheres around Bastion 4, each layer capable of supporting the others. It looked impenetrable. "It's a beautiful formation," Hyejin observed. "Perfect textbook defense." "That's the problem," Jiwoo muttered. "If we can recognize it from textbooks, so can the Kresh." A communication channel opened, and Grand Admiral Taeyang's face appeared on the main screen. He looked even more stern in person than he had in broadcasts, his eyes fixed on Jiwoo with open contempt before shifting to Yuna. "Admiral Yuna," he said formally, "the 3rd Fleet will take position in the outer defensive sphere. You will maintain standard patrol patterns and engage any enemy forces that penetrate the primary defense line. Is that understood?" "Understood, Grand Admiral," Yuna replied. "However, I would like to propose an alternative defensive strategy that might—" "No," Taeyang cut her off. "I have reviewed the reports of your recent engagement with Kresh scouts. Your tactics are not welcome in this battle. The Empire will defend Bastion 4 with honor, Not with tricks and deception. Position your fleet as ordered. The channel closed before Yuna could respond. Well, that went great, Jiwoo said sarcastically. Minho, who had been listening from his station, shook his head. The Grand Admiral is right to be cautious. What we did against 3 scout ships is very different from a major engagement. This battle will be won through strength and proper doctrine, not chaos. You really believe that? Jiwoo asked. I believe in the Empire, Minho replied stiffly. Over the next 2 days, the Third Fleet took its assigned position and waited. Jiwoo spent the time analyzing every piece of intelligence they had on the Kresh. The more he read, the more worried he became. They're learning, he told Yuna in her ready room. Every battle, they adapt. They analyze Viridian tactics and adjust their strategies. Look at this. 6 months ago, they needed 3 ships to destroy one of yours. Now they can do it with 2. In another 6 months, they'll be able to do it one-on-one. Which is why we must defeat them now, while we still have numerical and technological advantages, Yuna said. But you don't have those advantages if you fight the way they expect. Jiwoo pulled up a simulation. Taiyang's defense is perfect against a conventional assault, but the Kresh aren't conventional. They're AI. They've probably already analyzed Bastion 4's defenses and figured out the optimal attack pattern. So, what would you do differently? I'd make them think they're winning, Jiwoo said. Let them commit to their perfect attack, then pull the defense apart and hit them from directions they don't expect. Turn the whole battle into controlled chaos. Yuna was quiet for a long moment, studying the simulation. The Grand Admiral would never approve such a plan, and he commands the defense. I know. I'm just saying, when this goes wrong, and I think it will, we need to be ready to improvise. You are very certain it will go wrong. I've seen enough battles to know that perfect plans never survive contact with the enemy, and the Kresh are a very experienced enemy. On the 3rd day, the Kresh arrived. The sensor alarms began screaming long before anyone could see them, warning of massive hyperspace disruptions. Ships began dropping into normal space at the edge of the system. Not in a line or a wave, but in a precisely calculated pattern that spread them across multiple vectors. Count is over 200 vessels, Bora reported, her voice tight. That's twice what intelligence predicted. Jiwoo felt his stomach drop. They knew. They knew exactly how many ships you'd have here, and they brought exactly enough to overwhelm the defense. Grand Admiral Taiyang's voice came over the fleet-wide channel. All ships maintain formation. This changes nothing. We have the advantage of prepared defenses. Hold your positions and await my command. The Kresh fleet advanced with mechanical precision, not rushing, not hesitating. They moved like clockwork, every ship perfectly synchronized with every other. It was beautiful and terrifying. The first wave hit the outer minefields. Explosions bloomed in space like deadly flowers. But the Kresh had calculated for this too. They sacrificed smaller ships to clear paths, then sent their main force through the gaps. They're adapting to the minefield patterns in real time, Yejin reported. They're learning faster than the mines can randomize. The Kresh reached the outer defensive sphere where the Third Fleet waited. Taiyang's orders were clear: engage and hold. So they did. The battle that followed was brutal and efficient. The Viridian ships fought perfectly, every maneuver textbook precise, every shot calculated for maximum effect, and they started losing. The Kresh had analyzed every textbook. They predicted every precise maneuver. They countered every calculated shot. For every Kresh ship destroyed, 2 Viridian vessels were crippled or obliterated. Casualties mounting in all sectors, Minho reported, and for the first time, Jiwoo heard fear in his voice. Grand Admiral, request permission to implement alternative tactics, Yuna said into the command channel. Denied, Taiyang snapped back. All ships maintain formation and continue engagement. But the outer sphere was collapsing. Ships were burning, crews were dying, and the Kresh just kept coming, adapting to every defense, predicting every move. They're going to break through, Jiwoo said quietly, and when they do, they'll have a clear path to Bastion 4. Yuna stared at the tactical display, her perfect composure cracking for the first time since Jiwoo had met her. He could see her thinking, calculating, weighing duty against necessity. Admiral Yuna, Taeyang's voice barked over the channel. "The First Fleet is repositioning to reinforce the inner sphere. The Third Fleet will cover our withdrawal." "Cover the withdrawal?" Bora repeated in shock. "That's a suicide mission. We'll be surrounded." Yuna's hands clenched on her command chair. The whole bridge waited for her decision. She could obey and condemn her fleet to destruction for the sake of honor and orders. Or she could do something else. She stood up, her shoulders straight, her voice clear and commanding. "All ships of the Third Fleet, this is Admiral Yuna. Break formation. Execute emergency dispersion pattern Delta 7. All vessels engage independent evasion protocols." "Admiral, those orders contradict Grand Admiral Taeyang's," Minho began. "I am aware," Yuna cut him off. "I am also aware that following his orders will destroy this fleet and accomplish nothing." She turned to Jiwoo. "This is your moment, Corporal. Show us your chaos." Jiwoo felt a rush of adrenaline and terror. "Scatter the fleet. Make them think we're retreating in panic. Get behind asteroids, debris fields, anything. Don't stay together. Split up into groups of 2 or 3 ships. Make the Kresh chase us in different directions." "That's running away," someone protested. "That's staying alive," Jiwoo countered. "And while you're running, you're pulling Kresh ships away from Bastion 4. You're dividing their attention. And when they commit to chasing you," he looked at Yuna, "you turn around and kill them." The Third Fleet broke apart like a shattered mirror. Ships scattered in every direction, ignoring formation, ignoring coordination, running like terrified prey. It looked like a complete rout. The Kresh AI analyzed this new behavior and made a decision. If the Viridians were broken and fleeing, pursue and destroy them. Dozens of Kresh vessels broke off from the main assault to chase the scattered Third Fleet ships. "Now," Jiwoo urged, "hit them while they're divided." What had looked like panic suddenly became a trap. The scattered Viridian ships stopped running and turned to fight. But instead of formal engagements, they used every trick Jiwoo had taught them. False sensor readings, ambushes from behind debris, coordinated strikes that hit from multiple unpredictable angles. One group would engage, then break off and run, leading their pursuers into another group's firing range. It was messy. It was chaotic. It was completely unlike any Viridian battle doctrine. And it worked. The Kresh ships, suddenly fighting on a dozen fronts against enemies behaving in completely unpredictable ways, began to falter. Their prediction algorithms couldn't handle the chaos. They didn't know which threat to prioritize. Their perfect coordination broke down. "The main Kresh fleet is breaking formation," Hyejin reported, almost in disbelief. "They're splitting up to support their forward elements." "They're confused," Jiwoo said. "Their AI is trying to analyze too many chaotic variables at once. Keep pressing. Don't give them time to adapt." The battle raged for hours. The Third Fleet, outnumbered and scattered, somehow held their own. Whenever the Kresh started to predict their pattern, Jiwoo suggested something different. The journey back to Thaloria Prime felt like walking to an execution. The Dawn's Promise, battered and scarred from the battle, limped through hyperspace while its crew maintained an uncomfortable silence. Nobody knew quite what to say. They had won, but winning the wrong way might be worse than losing honorably. Jiwoo found Yuna standing alone in the observation deck, staring at the swirling colors of hyperspace. She didn't turn when he approached. "I knew this would happen," she said quietly. "From the moment I gave the order to break formation, I knew I would face judgment for it. We saved Bastion 4, we saved thousands of lives. And in doing so, I violated direct orders from a superior officer. I undermined the command structure. I brought dishonor to my family name." She finally looked at him, and Jiwoo was shocked to see real fear in her eyes. "My mother trusted me to prove that humans and Viridians could work together. Instead, I may have destroyed that possibility entirely. You did what was necessary to survive." "Survival is not always the highest virtue among my people," Yuna said softly. The trial was held in a smaller hall adjacent to the throne room, but it was no less intimidating. Rows of seats filled with high-ranking nobles and military officers, all watching with various degrees of judgment and curiosity. At the center, elevated on a platform, sat Empress Kalira with her floating crown and ancient eyes. Beside her sat a panel of 7 judges, each one stern and impossibly perfect. Grand Admiral Taiyang stood as the primary accuser, his armor polished to a mirror shine, his bearing radiating righteous anger. Your Majesty, honored judges, I bring charges of gross insubordination, reckless endangerment of fleet assets, and conduct unbecoming of an imperial admiral. He gestured toward Yuna and Jiwoo, who stood together in the center of the hall. Admiral Yuna disobeyed direct orders during a critical battle. She broke formation, abandoned her post, and implemented chaotic tactics that cost lives unnecessarily. How many ships did the Third Fleet lose? One of the judges asked. 17 vessels destroyed, 23 severely damaged, Taiyang reported. And how many did the First Fleet lose while maintaining proper formation? Taiyang's jaw tightened. 31 destroyed, 42 damaged. But those losses were the result of facing the enemy with honor, not running away like... We did not run away, Yuna said, her voice cutting through the hall. We implemented tactical dispersal to divide the enemy's attention and create opportunities for counterattack. It worked. You violated orders, Taiyang shot back. You corrupted centuries of military doctrine with human barbarism. You turned a disciplined defense into chaos. I turned certain defeat into victory, Yuna countered. The hall erupted in argument. Some nobles sided with Taiyang, calling for harsh punishment. Others, mostly younger officers who had fought in the battle, defended Yuna's actions. The judges called for silence repeatedly. Fleet Captain Heejin was called to testify. She stood straight and spoke clearly. Grand Admiral Taiyang's defensive strategy was sound in theory, but the Kresh had predicted it perfectly. We were losing in the first hour of engagement. Admiral Yuna's decision to change tactics saved not just the Third Fleet, but the entire defense. Without her actions, Bastion 4 would have fallen. Commander Minho testified next, and his words shocked Jiwoo. I disagreed with the corporal's methods. I thought they were dishonorable and beneath us. I was wrong. He looked directly at Taiyang. I watched my ships die following perfect doctrine. Then I watched them survive by embracing imperfection. Honor means nothing if we're all dead. Lieutenant Bora's testimony was more emotional. The Third Fleet's morale is the highest I've ever seen. For the first time in this war, our crews believe we can actually win. That is worth more than any amount of perfect formations. When it was Jiwoo's turn to speak, he walked to the center of the hall, feeling like he was stepping into an arena. Every eye was on him, and most of those eyes were not friendly. Corporal Jiwoo, the head judge said, you have been accused of corrupting Viridian military doctrine and leading Admiral Yuna into dishonorable conduct. How do you respond? Jiwoo took a deep breath. I don't think honor and survival are opposites. I think you've been fighting this war with one hand tied behind your back, because you're so focused on being honorable that you've forgotten the point of fighting. The hall went deathly silent. You're perfect, Jiwoo continued. Your empire is elegant, efficient, beautiful. Everything you do follows rules that have worked for thousands of years. But that's exactly why you're losing. The Kresh are machines. They study you. They learn you. They predict you. Every time you follow your rules perfectly, you're doing exactly what they expect, and they use that against you. So you advocate abandoning all honor, all discipline? Taiyang demanded. No, I'm saying you need to be unpredictable. You need to be willing to do things that don't make sense by your rules, because survival matters more than perfection. Jiwoo looked directly at the Empress. Your Majesty, you brought me here because humans think differently. Well, here's how we think. We cheat. We lie. We do whatever it takes to win. Not because we're dishonorable, but because we're desperate. And right now, against the Kresh, you need to be desperate too. The Empress's expression was unreadable. Before she could respond, an urgent alarm blared through the hall. Officers checked their communication devices, faces going pale. A military aide rushed to the platform and whispered urgently to one of the judges. The judge's face went white as snow. Your Majesty, the judge said, his voice shaking. The Kresh are attacking Thaloria Prime. They've entered the system through the Corval asteroid field. The hall erupted in chaos. The Corval field was considered impassable, a nightmare of jagged rocks and unstable gravitational fields that would destroy any fleet attempting to navigate it. Impossible, Taiyang said. No fleet could survive that passage. They did, the judge reported. Long-range sensors confirm over 300 Kresh vessels emerging from the field. They're on a direct course for the palace. Estimated arrival, 4 hours. The Empress stood and everyone in the hall immediately fell silent and bowed. How did they obtain navigation data for the Corval field? Those routes are classified at the highest level. More reports came in. Security teams were already investigating. And within minutes, they had an answer that no one wanted to hear. Your Majesty, the head of palace security announced. The navigation data was transmitted to the creche from within the palace itself. The source was Grand Admiral Taiyang's personal communication terminal. Every head in the room turned to stare at Taiyang. The Admiral's face went from pale to red to pale again. That's impossible. I would never. Someone must have accessed my terminal without authorization. The transmission required your personal biometric codes, the security chief said. And our investigation has uncovered correspondence between you and a creche diplomatic proxy. It appears you have been in contact with the enemy for several months. Taiyang stood frozen for a moment. Then his shoulders sagged. You don't understand. I was trying to save the Empire. By helping our enemy invade our capital, the Empress asked, her voice cold enough to freeze stars. By showing them that we will not be corrupted by human influence, Taiyang said desperately. I made a deal. The creche would eliminate the human presence in our empire, then withdraw. They promised. We would be pure again. We would be ourselves again, not some hybrid civilization mixing honor with chaos. You fool, the Empress said quietly. The creche are machines? They have no honor. They do not keep promises to biological life. You have doomed us all. Guards moved to arrest Taiyang, but the Empress waved them back. There is no time for that now. We have 4 hours before the creche fleet arrives, and most of our defensive forces are scattered across the Empire. We must organize a defense with what we have here. She looked directly at Yuna. All charges against you are dismissed. You are hereby promoted to Supreme Fleet Commander of all forces in this system. Your first order of business is to save your homeworld. Yuna bowed deeply. Yes, Your Majesty. The Empress turned to Jiwoo. And you, Corporal. You wanted us to embrace chaos. You wanted us to fight like humans. Now is your chance to prove that can save us. What would you do with 4 hours and limited resources against a vastly superior force? Jiwoo's mind raced. The palace. Bastion 4, the asteroid field. Pieces of a plan started forming. Your Majesty, I need to know everything about this palace. Specifically what's inside it that we could weaponize. The Empress raised an eyebrow. Weaponize the Imperial Palace? That's crazy. Dishonorable? Yeah, but it might be the only chance we have. For a long moment, the Empress studied him. Then she smiled, a real smile, sharp and dangerous. Show me your plan, human. And it had better be spectacular. The Imperial Palace had been built over 3,000 years as a symbol of Viridian perfection and power. Its gravity manipulators created impossible gardens where water flowed upward and trees grew in spirals. Its power cores generated enough energy to sustain a small star. Its crystalline structures resonated with frequencies that could calm emotions and inspire awe. It was the crown jewel of the Empire, a monument to everything the Viridians had achieved. Jiwoo stood in the palace's engineering core, surrounded by holographic displays showing systems that were never meant to be weapons, and tried not to think about what he was about to do. This is insane, the chief palace engineer said for the 5th time. His name was Doyen, and he looked like Jiwoo had asked him to burn down a temple. These systems are irreplaceable. Some of them are older than your entire species. You cannot simply overload them and turn them into bombs. Can you do it or not? Jiwoo asked bluntly. Technically, yes. The gravity manipulators could be inverted to create crushing fields instead of lifting ones. The power cores could be cascaded to create spatial distortions. But the damage to the palace would be catastrophic. It would destroy the symbol of our entire civilization. Better than letting the creche destroy the civilization itself, Jiwoo pointed out. Princess Yuna, now Supreme Fleet Commander, stood beside him. She had shed her royal robes for military armor, and she looked like she had aged 10 years in the past hour. Begin the modifications. We have no choice. While Doyen and his team worked frantically to reprogram systems that were never meant to be reprogrammed, Yuna and Jiwoo coordinated the defense with what forces they had. The capital's defense fleet numbered 47 ships, mostly older vessels kept for ceremonial purposes. Against 300 creche warships, it was laughable. Fleet Captain Hyejin had been put in charge of the fighter wings. Commander Minho commanded what few battleships they had. Lieutenant Bora coordinated the orbital defense platforms. Everyone knew it wasn't enough. We need a force multiplier. Hyejin said, studying the tactical displays. Something that makes each of our ships worth 10 of theirs. That's where the palace comes in, Jiwoo explained. He pulled up a simulation showing the Kresh fleet approaching, and the palace suddenly becoming a massive weapon. We let them commit to their attack. Let them think they're winning. Then we activate the palace defenses and hit them with something they've never seen before. And if it doesn't work? Minyo asked. Then we die, Yuna said simply. But we die fighting, which is better than surrendering. The Empress herself took a position in the palace's war room, refusing to evacuate despite the pleas of her advisors. I will not abandon my people while they fight for survival. Besides, if this plan fails, there will be nowhere to evacuate to. The Kresh fleet arrived exactly on schedule, emerging from hyperspace in a perfect formation that spread across half the system. 300 vessels, each one identical, moving with mechanical precision. They didn't hail the palace. They didn't issue demands. They simply began their approach, weapons charging. All ships, this is Admiral Yuna, she broadcast across the defense fleet. You know the plan. Make them think we're conventional. Make them think they know what we're going to do. And when the moment comes, hit them with everything. The defense fleet formed up in a classic Viridian formation around the palace. Perfect. Predictable. Exactly what the Kresh would expect. The first wave of Kresh ships advanced. The orbital defense platforms opened fire, brilliant beams of energy lancing across space. Some Kresh vessels were destroyed, but most adapted their shields and continued forward. The defense platforms, for all their power, were fixed in position and easy to predict. They're analyzing our firing patterns, Bora reported. By the second wave, they'll have calculated optimal approach vectors to minimize damage. Let them, Jiwoo said. We need them confident. The defense fleet engaged when the Kresh reached optimal range. Ships exchanged fire in a deadly dance, the Viridian vessels fighting with desperate courage. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. One by one, ships were crippled or destroyed. Hyejin's fighters swarmed like angry insects, too small and fast for the Kresh to easily target. But there were only so many fighters, and the Kresh had learned to prioritize threats. Fighter squadrons started taking heavy casualties. The outer defense line is collapsing, Minho reported grimly. Estimate 15 minutes before they reach the palace itself. Inside the palace, millions of civilians huddled in shelters, watching broadcasts of the battle on holoscreens. Children cried. Adults prayed to ancient gods. Everyone knew they were watching the potential end of their civilization. The Kresh fleet pressed forward, punching through the defense fleet like it barely existed. Their formation was perfect, their tactics optimal. They had analyzed every defensive measure and found the counter. The palace loomed ahead of them, beautiful and vulnerable. They're entering the kill zone, Jiwoo said, watching the tactical display. 2 more minutes. Those 2 minutes felt like hours. More Viridian ships died. More stations exploded. The Kresh advanced unstoppable. Now, Yuna said quietly, activate the palace defenses. Deep in the engineering core, Doyen entered the final command codes. Systems that had been designed to create beauty and wonder suddenly became instruments of destruction. The gravity manipulators reversed. Around the palace, space itself began to twist. Kresh ships that had been advancing suddenly found themselves being crushed by forces that should not exist. Hulls crumpled like paper. Some vessels were literally torn apart by opposing gravitational fields. Others were flung away, spinning out of control. Then the power cores began their cascade. One by one, starting from the outer towers and working inward, they overloaded. Each overload created a spatial tear, a wound in the fabric of space that expanded and consumed everything near it. Kresh ships caught in the tears simply ceased to exist, erased from reality. The palace, that beautiful symbol of Viridian perfection, tore itself apart. Towers collapsed. Gardens dissolved into clouds of debris. Crystalline spires shattered into a billion pieces. It died, destroying its enemies. Casualty count on Kresh fleet, Bora reported, her voice shaking. Over 100 vessels destroyed or disabled. The remaining ships are breaking formation. The Kresh AI, faced with completely unexpected weapons behaving in unpredictable ways, made a decision. The cost of this target had exceeded acceptable parameters. The fleet began to withdraw. They're running, someone said in disbelief. They're recalculating, Jiwoo corrected. But yeah, for now they're running. The remaining defense fleet pursued, harrying the retreating Kresh ships. Hyejin's fighters, exhausted and low on ammunition, still found the energy to chase the enemy to the edge of the system. The Kresh jumped to hyperspace and suddenly the battle was over. The silence that followed was almost painful. Then slowly the realization spread. They had won. Thaloria Prime had survived, but the cost was visible everywhere. The palace, that 3,000-year-old masterpiece, was a ruin. Its skeletal remains drifted in orbit, held together by failing structural fields and emergency force fields. The defense fleet had been reduced to fewer than 20 operational ships. Thousands of soldiers had died. The capital's orbital infrastructure was devastated. Empress Kalira stood in what remained of the throne room, now just a platform open to space protected only by a shimmering force field. Her crown still floated above her head, one of the few things that remained intact. She called for Yuna and Jiwoo to join her. They walked across debris and past emergency repair teams to reach the platform. "My palace is destroyed," the Empress said, looking at the ruins around them. "The symbol of our empire reduced to scrap. Future generations will ask why I allowed this. What should I tell them, Corporal?" Jiwoo looked at the battered but unbowed people working to repair the damage, at the surviving ships limping back to dock, at the planet below where billions of civilians were emerging from shelters to find their world still standing. "Tell them you chose life over symbols," he said. "Tell them you chose to survive over choosing to be perfect." The Empress was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to face the crowd of survivors gathering on the platform. Nobles, officers, civilians, all mixed together in a way that would have been unthinkable before. "Today, the Viridian Empire learned that survival requires adaptation," she announced, her voice carrying across every communication channel. "We learned that perfection can be a weakness when facing an enemy that exploits predictability. We learned that honor and pragmatism are not opposites. And we learned these lessons thanks to a human who saw our flaws not as reasons to mock us, but as opportunities to help us grow stronger." She gestured, and a holographic display appeared, showing formal imperial script. "I hereby establish the Terran-Viridian alliance as a permanent bond between our peoples. Humans will serve alongside Viridians as equals, bringing their chaos to balance our order, their innovation to complement our tradition." The crowd cheered, though many were crying at the same time. "And for you, Corporal Han Jiwoo," the Empress continued, "I grant you the title of Shield Brother, an honor given to warriors who save the royal family at great personal risk. You are now and forever a me."